Hi, and welcome back to marketing. Hopefully, you've completed last week's information and lectures. The lecture on case studies was because we're going to start a case study this week. If you've looked at your module for this week, you notice that there's an assignment for case study, and then there's also a PDF for the case study itself. So remember, when you're doing a case study, if you remember from what we talked about last time, you're putting yourself in the shoes of the decision maker in the case, which in this case, I believe her name is Phoebe Masters. So you're going to put yourself into her shoes, and the information in the case is the information that you have. So you're taking her place, trying to make a decision about a new product and packaging launch. And you're trying to make that decision with the information that's available to you at this time. And that information is the information provided in the case. So there isn't anything else out there for you to access. You may or may not know something about the market and what's happened to the market. This case was set in 2005. So obviously we have 12 years of hindsight. So those of you who are know something about the products that are discussed, the cosmetics, may know what's happened since, but you're going to block that out. You're going to look at this as if you were sitting in that chair trying to make a decision with the information provided. So take that into account. What we're going to talk about today is another method for approaching decision making, which is really what management is. Management is about making decisions. And since you're in a course that's teaching you management, or in a program that's teaching you management, understanding that decision making process is really important. And you're going to use maybe some of the skills that you take away from this lecture, and also the skills from the case study lecture, to help you with that decision-making process. So the idea of case studies is to put you in the shoes of someone in a real-life situation. It's not quite real life, but it's designed to make it feel like you're in that real-life situation. No right decisions, no wrong decisions. You make decisions based on the information you have, and you need to provide the reader of your case study analysis. You have to provide the reader with a clear understanding of not only what decision you made, but how you made the decision, what information you used to make that decision. So this first slide here, Peter Drucker is a famous management guru. And he has been a professor at the Harvard Business School for a long time. And this is his definition of decision making. It's rational and systematic, and you have to organize it in a definite sequence of steps, each of them in turn rational and systematic. So you have to figure out how to make decisions, and in order to do that, you need to organize your decision-making process. Now, we all make decisions every day. We make hundreds of decisions every day. What should I have for breakfast? Should I go get a cup of coffee? Should I watch Shaughnessy's lecture now, or should I put it off for a while longer? What am I going to do? These decision-making processes are the essence of human life. We have to make these decisions all the time. And we do something internally that is like the decision-making process that we're talking about here. We just do it in a very shortened sense. So should I watch Shaughnessy's lecture now, or should I put it off? Well, if I put it off long enough, then I'm not going to have enough time to absorb it and spit back at him whatever he wants. So I'm making a decision. What would I rather do? Would I rather go do something else rather than watching his lecture? Probably. But I have to make some trade-offs in that decision-making process. So what are the benefits and what are the costs of making that decision? So you're doing that all the time, whatever decision you're making. But when you're making a business decision, you usually have to make the decision. You hope that it's right, and you have to use all of the information that you have, and oftentimes you have to defend that decision to some superior or someone else. So you need to have it well defined and well organized. So this method of making decisions, and this is certainly not the only one, but it works pretty well. So we've got something called decide. So define the problem. So that's the biggest problem in decision making. That's always the biggest and perhaps most difficult thing to do. What is the problem that I'm trying to solve? So define that problem. Then take a look at all the things that are going to be involved in the decision. What are the factors in making this decision? So we're going to enumerate or list or figure out what the decision factors are. These aren't the decisions, but what are the pieces that I need to know in order to make a decision? Then I need to consider or think about the relevant information. And that word relevant is really important. In this case that you're going to be doing and in real life, there's often lots of information. Some of it's relevant and some of it's not. And you have to make the decision, or you have to make the judgment, what of the information you're looking at, what is relevant and what is not relevant. So that's a piece that you have to consider. And excluding the irrelevant information makes decision making a lot easier. So you need to think about only the relevant stuff, and the irrelevant stuff you can exclude. And in life, there's always irrelevant stuff. And in these cases, this case that you're going to do, there's irrelevant information included with the relevant information, and you have to decide what matters and what doesn't. Now you've figured out what your decision factors are. You've looked at the information that you have. Now you have to make actually a decision. You have to identify what alternative is best, and there's usually multiple possible alternatives. What should I do? Should I do nothing? Should I do this, that, or the other thing? Should I do X, Y, or Z? So there's usually multiple alternatives, and you have to decide which one you think is the best given the relevant information that you have compiled. So, and then once you've figured out what the best alternative is, so you've essentially made your decision, now you have to develop a plan to implement it. How am I going to take this decision that I've made and actually make it take place? So what's my implementation process? And then finally, once I'm implementing the process, I have to be able to evaluate the whole process that I've made, and also evaluate and establish metrics to evaluate the decision as it goes forward. So have I been successful? If not, then I have to start over and fix the things that aren't working. So that's kind of the process, and the decide acronym helps a little bit with remembering those things, and I think it works pretty well. So decide, if you've defined the problem well, it's half solved. Absolutely true. If you know what your problem is, it's way easier to solve than if you really haven't defined it. So what you have to know is what your objectives are, what kind of constraints you have, and how are you going to know if you're winning? How do you measure success? So where am I trying to go? What things are in my way? What kind of constraints do I have? And then how am I going to measure success? Now, all of you did for, I think 2 weeks ago, you did a little SWOT analysis on yourselves, and you talked about your strengths and weaknesses. The weaknesses are going to be constraints, and then you talked about opportunities and threats. So if I know what my objective is, I want to become a logistics manager. That's my objective. What strengths do I have? What weaknesses do I have? What opportunities are out there and what threats are out there? And then when am I going to say I've achieved my goal of being a logistics manager. Well, what's my success measure? I've got a job with the logistics in the title. I'm doing my job and I'm succeeding at it. I'm getting paid a lot. Lots of different ways to measure success. So you need to know how you're going to know when you succeeded, and then obviously you'd probably come up with new objectives in personally, and business works the same way. So what are the decision factors? There are things that are uncontrollable and things that are controllable. So I can control certain things in any decision, but there's always uncontrollable things I can't influence. So when I'm making decisions, I need to look at both the things I can control, and then the uncertainties obviously affect my decision, because if there's lots of uncertainties, my decision is more likely not to succeed. So I want to make sure I want to remove as many uncertainties as I can, and in any decision that I'm looking at. Relevant information. What information is provided? We're looking at case studies. So what information is provided about the industry, about consumers, about competitors? What are my strengths and weaknesses as an organization? And what alternatives does that allow me to look at? So relevant information, we already talked about this briefly. Relevant information is stuff that matters relative to the decision that I'm trying to make. There's often, in any decision-making process, there's often way too much information. In many of the cases, including the case you're looking at, there may be different viewpoints from people within the same organization. Some people might think that this is the right thing to do, and they're quite eloquent about saying this is what we should do. And then there are other people who think maybe we shouldn't do that, we should do something totally different. And they may be eloquent as well. Within organizations, oftentimes what the right decision is not very clear, and people in different parts of the organization have very different views of what should happen because they're familiar with their part of the organization. They're not necessarily familiar with the big picture. So you can have conflicts, different viewpoints can be in conflict, but really relevant mean what matters, what's important. That's hard to teach. It's a real management skill. Trying to decide what's important and what's not important is really what managers need to do. There's always lots of information. There's always holes in the information, things you don't know. And you have to make decisions based on incomplete information, and you have to decide what kind of the information you do have, what part of it is relevant or what matters. Everything is not necessarily factual. So information given in a case, some of it will be factual, some of it will be opinion. And then you have to decide whether those opinions are accurate. And sometimes you may not have the information that you need, and this doesn't really happen in a case study, though it could. You could make the recommendation that we're not ready to make a decision. We have to go ahead and do a further study on this area because this is key to our decision. That's a valid thing to do in a case study. So sometimes you have to create your own relevant information if you don't have it already. You have to do more research, essentially. Once you've got everything put together, then you have to figure out what the best alternative is. I'm going to show you a decision tree format. That's not necessarily what will work in every case, but it's not a bad way to look at things. Decision analysis tries to apply a quantitative tries to apply a number or a quantitative value to each possible decision. And using that kind of a decision tree or a decision analysis process, may help you make decisions. It doesn't make decisions for you, but it may help you rank the various options in a way that makes it easier to make a decision, a wise decision. So if we look here, if we take an action, there's a possible response, and in this case we're using two possible responses. So we take an action to do something and our competitors respond in one of two ways, and then there's two possible outcomes depending on how our competitors respond. So if I'm an airline and I raise prices on a certain route, there are two possible outcomes. My competitors match my price, so they raise prices with me, or they keep their prices the same, and maybe there's a third option that they actually lower prices. And what happens if I make that decision to raise prices and my competitors raise their prices with me? What happens? If they don't raise their prices, what happens? And if they lower their prices, what happens? So those are your outcomes. So that's the kind of thing we're looking at in a decision tree. So if I'm looking at a market penetration strategy, which means I'm looking at gaining market share, and my response from my competitors is aggressive, then I estimate that I will have a profit of $2 million from this action. If I do a market penetration strategy, so aggressively seeking market share, and my competitors are passive, they don't respond to my market penetration strategy, then I would make $3 million from this strategy. So there's a difference in outcome. Instead, I also have the option of doing a market development strategy, so not trying to get market share, but trying to develop the market for myself and others. And I seek aggressive competition, and I would see $1 million profit, and passive competition, and I'd have a $4 million profit. So there, I've got four options that generate four different levels of profit, depending on what my competitors do and what I do. So that's kind of process. And I can look at that and just put together a payoff table to try to quantify or rank those various decisions. So a payoff table looks like this. If competitors are passive, and I think that there's a 60% chance that they will be, these are my results. If competitors are aggressive, and I think there's a 40% chance that they'll be aggressive, those are my results. So now I've got two different, I've assigned probabilities to what I think my competitors will do based on my knowledge of the industry. So that's a management assessment. This could be wrong, but we're trying to make a decision, and we're trying to decide what to do. So we've assigned some probabilities. 0.6, 60% that they're going to stay passive, and 40% that they're going to stay aggressive. So now I can take the monetary value for each, the expected monetary value for each item by saying expected monetary value equals the outcome of uncertainty times the probability of uncertainty. So let's take a look at that. So market penetration, we're going to multiply 3 million times 0.6 and 2 million times 0.4, and my expected market value is going to be 2.6 million by taking the market penetration strategy, whereas my market development strategy will have a slightly better expected monetary value because I'm going to take 0.6 times 0.4 million and 0.4 times 1 million, 2.8. So now I've ranked my two strategies. My market penetration and my market development strategy are ranked. The expected monetary value of market development is slightly higher than it is for market penetration. That doesn't mean that I should do market development. It just gives me a way to rank these two things. Otherwise, I'm kind of flying by the seat of my pants or whatever. So this gives us a ranking system. Not necessarily totally accurate, obviously based on some estimates of how competitors might react, but gives me some help in making my decision. So think about that as a possibility when you're trying to make decisions. Um, Decision analysis is good. What if? What if this happens? What happens? It gives you quantification and can decide whether you can, this third bullet point that may help you decide, should I do more research? Do I need better information or not, to help me make my decision? Finally, you have to put together an implementation plan, which means you have to allocate all of your resources and figure out how long it's going to take to develop the marketing plan. And then once you've done all of this, go back and ask yourself the following questions. Did we make a decision? Was it a good decision? What pieces of it were good and what pieces of it weren't good? So go back and look at your decision and figure out whether it was a good decision. First of all, did you define, and these are the questions I'm going to ask when I'm grading your case. This is the kind of thing that I look at. Did you define the problem adequately? Did you look at all the pertinent alternatives and uncertainties? Did you make realistic assumptions? Was the relevant information considered, and did you exclude the irrelevant information, or did you just start trying to use irrelevant information, and that'll give you a pretty wrong answer often? Did you recommend an appropriate course of action? Was your logic consistent throughout the process? And did you overlook anything that you should have looked at? And then finally, how are you planning to implement the decision? So it's kind of the way I'm going to grade you is, have you made have you followed this kind of process? And if you haven't, if you didn't define the problem, you're going to have problems with all the other things and so forth. They're all interrelated. So that's just a tutorial on how to make a decision and how to use that in a case study. And I expect that you'll use this process in the case study that you're going to start on today. Very good. Thank you.